I'm going to sit down with the families because I don't like standing up here and around people. But I'm going to point you to, if you go to our news blog for today, for the conference, you'll see that there were 6 little clips, film clips. This was the first one, and we missed it because everyone was talking, but the next one you'll hear. We picked 6 that we thought represented good, family-oriented video clips readily available to the public. These are all on YouTube. And if you look at our news blog, there are links, and you'll be able to click through and watch them on your smartphone or on your computer at your leisure. This one was made by C&M Productions, which is 2 F.E.A.S.T parents who have made a bunch of these animated films. Some of them on motivational interviewing, on getting through meal times. I know a lot of you. How many of you have seen C&M Productions films? I will tell them he says so. They both go sorry not to be here. I suspect one or both of them are watching us right now. It's the kind of thing that families can do with very little money and some very good ideas. So I encourage you all to get involved with creating media and not just complaining about it. There's some good stuff out there, and we're trying to encourage it. So now I'm going to sit down. It is my great honor to sit among these mother-daughter pairs. I looked for father, son, different combinations, but we can't fit everyone in. But I would like to let everyone know that it's very important to F.E.A.S.T that we not always be talking about girls, even though a lot of us have daughters, and that we not only be looking at one diagnosis, but all diagnoses for eating disorders, and not all one type of treatment. But I think that these 2 wonderful families who have been willing to come here and do this have really interesting stories to tell us about relationships within a family and being a parent organization. We feel that's really important. So first, I'm going to ask each of the mothers and daughters to introduce themselves. Their bios are in your packet and also on the app. And let's get started. Let's start with you.
I'm excited to start telling
Oh, okay. My name is Pat Carlson. I never expected, as all of you sitting in this room, I never expected to be walking the journey that you have walked and are walking. But I can honestly say that there have been some wonderful things that have happened as a result of it. And I don't know how much to share. My daughter will share her story, but if you want to share more. I think it's just a brief introduction to who you are and who's in your family, so that we just kind of have an overview before. My husband and I have been married for 33 years, and Kathy is the second of our 2 children. We have a son who's 27, Kathy is 24. And we, I thought, had the model family where we just shared a wonderful life together. And I was living in Minnesota at the time that Cassie was diagnosed. My husband had just moved to another state and was living there, and Cassie was in college in California. And our lives became problematic and very complicated for a short time. But I guess for myself, I've been in publishing, editor for many years, and so I'm also hoping to do something with that. Cassie and I actually been discussing writing a book together where I write one chapter, she writes the next, etc., from my perspective and her perspective. So that may be forthcoming.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelsey, and like my mom mentioned, I am 24 years old. And I got sick when I was in college. I was a college athlete. I played basketball at a small school in California. So my journey was an interesting one, as all of you have seen stories as well. But my recovery process was involved my parents and my fiance at the time, who is now my husband, and we've been happily married for 2.5 years. And so that's kind of the story that you'll probably hear more about today, is the recovery of my family and my husband.
My name is Cindy Arnold, and we've had a pretty long journey. Started in 2001, and the first 6 years were pretty traditional treatment of eating disorders. Back in that time, there wasn't a lot of the science out there. So we kind of fumbled our way through many years of pretty much ineffective treatment, in and out of hospitals, in and out of treatment centers, many relapses. And it was 6 years ago that we tried our first family-based therapy. And that was like the turning point, really. We finally found a way to have some success. It wasn't a straight road. We had a lot of ups and downs even in that. But I would say today, especially the last 2 years, have been a period of quite stable recovery for Carrie. And I thank family-based therapy for that.
Okay. I'm Carrie Arnold. A lot of you probably know me as F.E.A.S.T, which is kind of my online alter ego. Like Kelsey, I first developed an eating disorder when I was in college, and I kind of did a rather spectacular crash and burn. For a while, I really struggled with putting together any sense of recovery. It was the anxiety and the eating disorder thoughts were so strong that I really couldn't maintain recovery on my own. And once my treatment team and my parents kind of united against the eating disorder in an effective way, I guess, was when I really started to see changes. And it took a while, even after getting to a healthy weight. It took a while to work through that. There were still some relapses, and it was still a long road, a lot of struggle. But probably in the last year, it's kind of coalesced where I felt both mentally and physically stable and in my life again.
Describe the members of your family. We know you have a sister.
One brother.
One brother's fine.
I also have an older brother, and it's my mom and my dad and my cat. Important, very important.
So we've talked about how old you all were when it happened. Can I ask the moms, when did you know?
I'm so glad you asked this, because after I was telling them about hope, but I didn't say this. This was really interesting, and I have to say this strongly. Kelsey was, like she mentioned, a full scholarship athlete for basketball in college, and was the last person I expected to get sick. And when I first heard the diagnosis for her, I immediately freaked out, and just, I'm a voracious reader, and I think I spent 3 days reading everything I could on the internet, and I was totally distressed on what I found and the abysmal recovery information that I found. And then I stumbled upon the Beast, and unbelievable. There was a mom, and I'll call me. And I think it was Colleen that said to me, Yeah, she's trying to hide it. She can't because she's so tall. My beautiful friend Colleen was on the phone with me instantly, and the information that I got from the beast said if I were you, I would be on the next plane out to California, and within 48 hours I was. And that's when I discovered how ill Kelsey really was. And then within a very short time, we got a plan in place actually she had to come out of school. She was so ill. And she should have been hospitalized. If I knew then what I know now, I can't believe I didn't have her in the hospital. But thank God, I brought her home where I watched her 24/7. Got her well enough to where we were able to, we connected with U.C.S.D. in San Diego. Am I telling too much now?
No,
Kelsey's like, yeah. Anyway, we did a family intensive week at University of California, San Diego with Dennis, her fiance at the time, where I could go on for days about this young man in her life. And he was a critical piece of her recovery and life now. But anyway, we did the week at UCSD because we came home for another month where we refed. And then she went back to school, believe it or not, which I don't recommend. But Dennis was there to do really ongoing refeeding with her for about 6 months. Every meal, every snack, amazing. So that's where the course was. And Kelsey, it's been almost 3 years now that she is recovered, and she can address that more.
Cindy, when did you know that Carrie was ill?
It was after Carrie had returned from a study abroad program, and following that semester was a fall semester. She was away. She returned to school, to college. She was a junior at the time, and she started out her semester struggling with depression, which started to get deeper, darker, and we did talk. She said, I will go to see a counselor, and we thought, okay, everything's being addressed. This is great. She was excelling in school. Everything else she was portraying as going wonderfully. And I went to pick her up in the spring, or rather, I think it was at the end of the semester in May. And I looked at her and I said, oh my God, what happened to you? She had dropped a lot of weight. She looked terrible. And okay. Back up. It's been a long time. At that time, it was okay. That's right. It was. She looked bad. She had just gone through finals, and she said, "Oh, I've just been studying a lot." And she had another summer. It was an internship, and that was going to be in Atlanta. And I said, "I don't know. I'm really uneasy about this. I don't think you should go away." And it was the, I'm fine, Mom. My husband said, let her go. And I had this feeling. I said, this doesn't feel right. And it was within about 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and she was calling home saying, she was reporting OCD, extreme OCD, which she had had when she was younger. And I thought, oh, this is the problem. It's not an eating disorder, it's an OCD. Found out that, and again, I told her, you need to go see someone down there. She says, I will, Mom. She was going to see, then she was reporting struggles with eating as well with the OCD. Went to see a specialist down in Atlanta, and with, I guess, it was at that time, the therapist said, you either need to go into treatment immediately, or you need to go to the emergency room. You need to be admitted. Carrie would not let me even come down. I said, Carrie, I'm coming down. We're going to get you to the hospital. She says, no, Mom, I'm doing this by myself. And I said, she made the plans, and it was a 2-week kind of acute stabilization in a treatment center. And I came to pick her up after that 2 weeks, and walking toward me, it looked like a concentration camp survivor. And I knew then we had real trouble. We had real trouble in our hands. And it was, that first year was in and out of hospitals. The first treatment center stay, that was probably one of the first years of many that she spent holidays in the hospital. And during that time, as parents, we were constantly kind of portrayed as, what did you do to provoke this? Why was it? What happened? And I think Carrie, at the same time, when she was in therapy, was constantly prodded to come up with, what was it that caused this eating disorder? What did your parents do? And so we went through years of this. And it was finally after 6 years of relapses, hospitalizations, and she was in the last treatment center 7 months, which was not covered by insurance, and then a very low period, and following that, oh sure, yes, please.
Well, part of the low period was a lot of this that I was being told about recovery was that, of course, I wasn't getting better because I wasn't choosing recovery, and I felt it was really my fault that I wasn't able to get better. And I mean, one of the therapists I was seeing at the time was kind of like, she was really frustrated with me, and she was basically like, you're really smart, you're in graduate school, this, and that, like, what is your problem? Why can't you just eat? And so it was, you know, and I really felt like a failure. I thought it was my fault that I wasn't getting better. I had no idea that there was better treatment out there. No one told me. No one told me that in order to start thinking better, I had to eat and gain weight. In fact, while I was in residential for 7 months, even though I was significantly underweight, they didn't make me gain weight. I was paying $1,000 a day to talk about my issues.
I knew we'd get this with a parent child.
And so after the 7 months treatment, which was all paid out of pocket, it was a chunk of change. I came back, I relapsed, and I blamed myself again. And you know, you've gone through a significant chunk of money. Insurance was not being cooperative, and I knew they weren't going to be. So at that point, I thought it would be better if I just overdosed and got it over with, because I really didn't see a better life for myself. And that's kind of when we started F.E.A.S.T, and then, you know, kind of the therapist and the treatment team I received kind of, that was when they got a clue about how really bad I was off mentally. And they basically, when I was discharged home to my parents, who were plating and preparing all my food. And that was when things slowly started to get better.
So in both of your families, you were legal adults when you became ill. I think it would be very interesting to hear from the parent and the patient perspective how the treatment environment were helpful or made things more difficult because of the legal adult. Did you negotiate it? Did you find a way to negotiate the legal age issue and caregiving despite those barriers?
You can start. Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say that Kelsey started with a therapist in schools before we started down this whole road, and she was adamant that we stay out of the whole process. And she said to me, we will not have any contact with you unless there's a medical reason. The day I went out to see Kelsey, and she had just been to the therapist, took her 2 hours to pick me up at the airport, typically a 10-minute drive that she had done many times, but she was so cognitively impaired she could not figure out how to get to the airport to get me. She'd just come from her therapist. The next morning, I took her for a medical evaluation when we found out how critically ill she was. I called the therapist. I said, when the heck were you going to call me and say there's a medical situation? She said, well, I'm not a medical professional. I said, exactly. I said, what do you have in place if you are not a medical professional to make sure? I said, have you once suggested that she'd have a medical evaluation in these months of treatment? Of course, you can answer that because the answer was no. And so I just on the spot fired her. And that's when we started down this process.
You were a legal adult at the time, and your mother is, steering her hair and getting involved in firing a therapist. From your perspective, what was going on, and how did that all work for you, knowing you were a legal adult?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I've always been very independent. Even when I was little, I could do everything on my own, and I was just fine. So I guess you could say I was 18 from the time I was like 5. So, but legally, it was an interesting thing too because Dennis, who was my fiance at the time, was also in the picture, and so he had a really heavy weight in the whole situation too. Because even though I was, fighting the idea that I, needed a medical evaluation and needed help and stuff, because as you can see, my mom is very fiery and she's always on top of everything. So, I appreciate that very much. But at times when I was growing up, that was really difficult, and I was like, you're overreacting. This is crazy. This is just how you are. But Dennis was able to provide another perspective as well. And even though I couldn't cognitively understand it, I loved him, and so that made me trust him to trust my mom, and that it wasn't just her being crazy. And so, I still was kicking and screaming a lot of the way, but I had other motivation for, even though I didn't think that I necessarily needed help. So that was an important piece in that kind of giving that over to my family, allowing them to help me when I couldn't help myself.
At the time, were you saying, yes, please help me?
No. Honestly, like deep down, the depression and anxiety and everything is just so paralyzing, and that's, it's not normal when you've had moments in life where things are great, you know that that's not right. So deep down, I knew there was something wrong, but that didn't mean that I wanted help. But there were times where I would have, glimpses saying, oh, maybe something else could help me. But, the times when the disorder was raging, I was just fine. So there was moments of both. And, as I got treatment and re-fed, I was able to see more of those glimpses of hope, and that was really important. And it's just so fascinating how food truly is medicine, and that really makes me different.
I don't know if anyone's looking at the Twitter feed, but I'm pretty sure that there's a flood of calls for whether Dennis has a brother.
Well, okay, technically no, he's not Dennis's brother. He's just like him.
Well, I think we need another panel on boyfriends. That would really be good.
Don't say that yet.
So the legal adulthood thing, how did you negotiate that?
I think at the time that we started family-based therapy, Carrie was at a point where the options were fairly limited. She really couldn't manage supporting herself. She knew that there were few options left that we had not tried, and it was a matter of she was told either you're going to end up in the hospital again, or you can try going home and letting your parents help to feed you. And she often said that she thought my cooking was better than the food in the hospital. So
it was.
So, and I thought, yes, I thought, we can do this. She would go into the treatment center, they would feed her. I thought, I can do this. I can do this at home. And at first, you know, Carrie was willing in many respects, but in a lot of other respects, I'm sure she fought it, but it was the option that seemed most sensible at the time.
So I'm not hearing anything about whether there were legal barriers. I mean, obviously there's emotional barriers, but did you find that there were legal or technical, or for example, with clinicians who felt that at 18, you know, how did you work that out?
Yeah, and that's what really bothered me when we got to this therapist, because I felt in my heart that Kelsey was really ill. And it was really difficult because I was far away. And so I thought, well, surely she'll call us, at least for some history or some input. And she clearly said to me, and she said, Kelsey has issues that she needs to find her voice and separate from you. And all this crap. And I just thought, what? She turned 18 and that's great, and she's always been really responsible and all that stuff. But you know what? We're a loving family. We're a team. We're not just individuals. And clearly, there's a part of understanding anything as the unit that, you know, it makes up the individual that makes up the unit. So that was my frustration that she said, and I understand that legally without something signed, she couldn't have certain contacts with me. But that was a huge barrier, potential barrier to Kelsey's healing.
This is very personal, no one has to answer it, but the financial burdens on families and insurance problems are something that everyone in this room has dealt with. If anyone has anything to say about how they, as a family, dealt with the issue of, you know, lost jobs, caregiving expenses, and paying for treatment and insurance, I think it's a really important topic for all of us. But very personal.
I developed elaborate fantasies about arson in my insurance company.
I actually went to battle with the insurance company. I don't know if I should say who they are, but anyway, this was a very, I did have help from some professionals in the insurance field, and even with that, I mean, many letters, calls, over many months, and every time I tried to deal with them, present evidence or lack of payment, it was like hitting a brick wall. I got nowhere, and it was taking such a toll on me personally. Carrie was relapsing, and I finally had to say, I don't care about the money, but I had to give it up. And it was just an impossible battle, and that's part of the reason we got into family-based therapy. We had run up so many bills, had gone through so many finances. Carrie had no insurance. We had just got finished paying 7 months of residential treatment care. And we thought we had no other resource. Family-based therapy, she comes home, we can do this. That was where we were with the insurance.
Did you want to say something about that?
Well, our situation was very different, but in my research, when I decided that ECFC was the place for us to go, our insurance company initially would not pay for it because they considered it experimental. And so they denied us at first, and I fought it, and they paid. So that, we have not incurred as much. They paid 50%, which they would have paid 50% anywhere, but we did pay the additional 50%. But I know many of you have incurred huge costs. We personally did not.
I'm going to ask one more question of my own, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from you all. Siblings. It's something that we don't talk about as much as I wish we did. But how, you have a relationship between mother and daughter, but then there's another sibling and also a spouse. So talk a little bit about how this affected and what help you might have gotten or not gotten from siblings.
Okay. Well, yeah, so my brother's 3 years older than me, and so I love my brother dearly. We've always been very close. But Kyle had some more issues, not issues, but he was more of a free thinker and everything, so got into a little more trouble than I did. I was kind of by the books, and if someone looked at me like I was doing something wrong, I panicked. So we were kind of very different. But I looked up to him very much. And so we were in different states when I was sick. But he was really supportive, but he wasn't in it day to day. But it was just really neat to see, how he reacted and how he loved me through it, and how he stopped to learn about it, even though he didn't personally understand it. He had other things that he was dealing with that could relate in a different way. So even though we both had separate issues, we were going through things at the same time. And so we were able to lean on each other through that. And then just in how he reacts to things around eating and eating disorders now through his education is kind of empowering and exciting to see that, if someone says something that is triggering or whatever, he will let them have it. And it's just really neat to see how he stands up for me and other people like me through that. So I had a positive experience, even though he didn't personally understand that issue right away. He had his own, and so we were able to relate on some level.
Although my brother was also named Kyle, and he is also older. I guess our sibling story wasn't quite as rosy, but it's kind of a saga that would probably, I can talk for the rest of this conference on that, but I'll just leave it at that.
It's a hard one. I'm going to ask for some questions from you all for the panel.
I just wanted to say that because I'm also, I'm part of this mother-daughter duo and another success story, and I also wanted to ask how your relationship with each other changed, because I know a lot of positive things changed as a result of something negative.
I guess, well, I'll go. What's interesting is, okay, I'm a nerd. Let's just get that out there. And so I read a study about family relationships and eating disorder recovery. And what was interesting about this study was it kind of followed families over time. It followed them at the start of treatment and then through the recovery process. And it gave the kids and the parents, questionnaires evaluating their relationships and relationship problems. And what was really interesting about this study was it found that as recovery happened, that was when family healing took place. It wasn't the other way around, which is totally the opposite of what I was taught initially about eating disorders, was that if you fix your dysfunctional family, then you will have no need for the eating disorder, and you will get better, and you will be fine, and you will love cheesecake. When they tracked the recovery process, they found that eating disorder recovery happened slightly ahead of the family healing process. So they could actually track over time, like they could show they could demonstrate that it was an effect rather than a cause of the recovery.
And was that true for you guys?
Yes, that was very true for us.
We had a very similar experience too. I did not like my mom most of the time. Obviously I loved her, she's my mom, but I was livid and angry and frustrated. I'd been eating for 18, 19, 20 years. I was fine, I knew how to eat, I don't need my mom to teach me how to do that again. That's how I thought. There were a lot of times that were really, really hard. But throughout the entire time, As frustrated as mom would get, as angry, you know, she said, it's not always going to be like this. You're not always going to feel like this, and I love you. And that was huge, you know. Like, even when I wasn't receptive, I heard it. And even when I didn't react in a way that was loving, I still knew that was true. So we definitely experienced a lot of healing after recovery happened.
Yeah. Can I just add to that one quick thing? And this is really important for some of you to hear. When we insisted that she come home from college, she was livid. She had 1 semester left. And yet, I said, do you want to come home Wednesday or Thursday? And she said, I have another choice. I said, Wednesday or Thursday. And you know what? She fought me. I don't know how many times she called me and texted me during that time frame, those couple of days, saying, this is so stupid, this is ridiculous. And then you know what? Let me just tell you, she got off the plane, ran to where I was standing, threw her arms around me and said, thank you so much for making me do this. I cannot tell you how much I needed you to do this. You need to hear that.
Yes. I actually have heard from a lot of you in the audience that you want to talk about college-age kids, and that's one of the messages that a lot of our more experienced parents say, is that when your kid says, that's stupid, you don't necessarily have to believe them.
That's probably not the kid that's saying.
I have a question for you. I'm fascinated and impressed, of course, by the inclusion of your young husband in family-based treatment. And we often see in older adults, in younger adults and older teens who have significant others, maybe husbands, maybe boyfriends, or fiancés, try to include them. And you know, we moms are used to stepping in front of the eating disorder and taking.
Sorry.
As moms, you're used to stepping in front of the eating disorder and taking the brunt of the anger that it will unleash on you. How did your young husband navigate that? And was it different?
That's a really good question. Well, first of all, I mean, I can understand how the parent or caregiver, that would be a really scary thing, especially for someone who's not married, to have a significant other involved, because there's no guarantees that person will stay in the other person's life. So that's scary. But Dennis, he's 6'6" and giant, so he, didn't understand anything about eating disorders, but he loved me, and so that made him eager to learn, because he knew me before I was really, really sick, so he knew that I wasn't myself, and so that something wasn't right, and so that made a huge difference. And I think that the training that he received was really important, because that helped him understand what was actually going on inside me, and that it wasn't me choosing to freak out. So the training that he got at UCSD when he went with my mom and I was really, really important to understand how to help me. So he got really frustrated a lot, because he had never experienced anything like that. But he was persistent, and we've told a couple people hear this, but I mean, when he was trying to refeed me, through the process, I called him a dictator, like all the time. Freaking dictator, because he made me do all these things that I didn't want to do, but he loved me enough to keep with it. So it's important for everyone, just to, I don't know, if you're younger growing up, to choose wisely who you fall in love with. It makes a difference.
There's a number of us as teenagers who have a couple of years or so that are getting ready to go to college. So in my case, I've been recovering for 5 years, 2 years on the line of college. What do you recommend as a preventive plan to put in place before we send them off to college.
I would talk to the college. I would make sure, we did at one point when Carrie went away, we had set up a plan with the college for weigh-ins, appointments, and that was the one, that was how at one point we caught that she needed to step away. So they did intervene at that one point. Have a relapse plan in place, have a contract, make sure you know what they are doing on their end. Have some kind of, I don't know what this was years ago when we kind of did it, so I don't know if there's what kind of communication they will agree to with the college students.
A lot of them will fight it tooth and nail. I would honestly, for basic weighing, you could probably rely on like the student health center to just check her weight, but I would have a community provider and insist that all waivers be signed for you to be able to communicate with them. Because if you see someone in the community, you can kind of stick the nails to them a little easier than you can with the college. And also college counselors, they're not trained for eating disorders. They're trained for like roommate problems. And they see you a couple of times, and generally they will refer you out if you have a serious mental health problem. If they can diagnose you with something in the DSM, generally they will refer you to someone in the community because they're so small. And most of them will not talk with you, even if you have a waiver signed. They'll ignore you. So I would have someone in the community and interview them before. And see them like when you drop your kid off, see them a time or two. So they get to have a relationship with you as well. And
that was an important piece for us. We had Kelsey, Dennis, and I together wrote a contract before leaving UCSD. What would happen going forward. That was a really important piece for us. And the last thing I would recommend is hire Dennis to go with you.
Clothing, anyone?
I just responding, and you said something that I thought I was surprised at. My immediate thought was, my kid is younger and she's still a minor, was, when they go off to college, make sure that you have, a release of information that is very clear, that there is no confidentiality between you and the daughter and the therapist. But you just said that even with those type of waivers, they find you. But
They just won't return your call.
What?
They just won't return your call.
But I think that if you go in with it, if it's agreement between your daughter and you and everybody, and because she's the one, she's no longer a minor, she's a legally adult, she has to sign it, and it's an agreement between you and your daughter saying, there is no confidentiality when it comes to your.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
I can tell you my experience at the University of Washington was that we had our daughter sign all the waivers in front of everyone from the clerk at the desk to the doctor to everyone. Told her, you don't have to sign that, honey. I know your mom is standing there telling you that you have to, but you don't. And she did sign them, and even after doing that, I could not get information from them. And I'd ask them, what more do she need to sign? It was just really, really difficult, and this was just a couple of years ago.
How many parents here had contracts, written contracts? How many felt it was successful? Oh dear, that's good.
So, Laura, one of the things I did with my daughter, and actually we have several great posts on the forum about how to do this, and we have a link to a post that Dr. O'Toole wrote as well. One of the things that I think is very true is that if you interview a provider and you get resistance, whether it's a student health service or a community provider, and they're trying to talk you or your daughter out of the contract, that's a sign that you need to find a different provider. And so that would be something I'd watch for. And the other thing, that I know you all know is be sure they're really in recovery before they go away, because college is a great place to be, but not a great place to recover. And the last thing I would say is you just have to be really, really committed that that's a no negotiation zone. So what I said to my daughter and to her provider was, if I don't get the information for whatever reason, she doesn't stay in school, period. And if I don't hear from you, my next stop is to get on a plane and go meet with the dean for students and tell them my daughter's gone on a medical leave. And fortunately, before she went away to college, I had a letter from her pediatrician at home stating that the only thing that was a condition actually on her medical clearance was to go to college and participate in sports. So that I had something that said, you have to put her on a medical leave. And it may seem very draconian to some of you. I did have to use it her freshman year. There was a time I didn't get the weight. I flew down there. And she said, I'm done with that. I'm an adult. I talked to my provider. They agree. I don't need to go. I said, well, that's fine, but I'm on my way to the dean of students, and you're going to be leaving with me, and we didn't ever have to do that again. But I think you have to have that backup plan. No matter how deep your daughter is in recovery, she's going to get messages from providers that she's an adult and she doesn't need to do this, and your sons or your daughter's safety net, and you must have that backup plan and follow through with it.
That's a very common thing. We are -1.
Oh.
And it's lunchtime, and you all know how I feel. Before we go to lunch, I want to say that I'm up here alone, but I am a mom, and I want to thank my daughter, and my husband, and my son for supporting this work and making it possible for us all to be in this room. And my whole family will be here, including my mother-in-law, and I hope you all meet them.